Good morning to everybody from Banska, Bystrica. We are happy and glad that we can welcome here today 35 students from 7 universities from 5 countries. Today they'll be debating 3 questions from international affairs, and the students in the audiences will also have an opportunity to ask questions. So I would like to ask the audiences to prepare those questions. And then whenever you have a question, please let us know that there is a question at any place from those 7 universities. We will try to be concise in the responses. There are no winners or losers of these debates. We are simply trying for the students to have an opportunity to provide the audiences with the best arguments that they can make. With that, I'd like to welcome in the audience here the representatives of our partners from the Center of Euro-Atlantic Studies in Belgrade. It's Anja Petkovic and Branko Momčilović. Sorry, Branko, for that. We are glad to have them here, and we are of course happy that Matej Bel University here in Banska Bystrica is hosting this debate as it is doing over a couple of years already. With that, let me retire actually to the side, and I'd like to invite to the podium the representatives of Belgrade University, Chisinau, and Banska Bystrica, and it will be Sofia, Mary, and Marek. Please come to the floor here. Just one more thing. The system that we are using is Google Hangout, and it's a very nice system, but which is very prone to the sounds which are coming from the background. So please be gentle and allow the students who are here to talk. If you need an urgency to communicate something to your fellow students, use the paper and pen to communicate that, because otherwise what we are transmitting will not be audible in those other 6 universities. And what we would like to have is a debate that they can actually enjoy and participate in. So please respect the fact that it's the only students who are here that will be answering the questions. Who is missing? Wonderful. So we have the first question in the debate. As you know, this year is a year of anniversaries. We have just had at the beginning of April the 70th anniversary of NATO, and we are coming close to anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. And the question is, was the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and of the totalitarian regime a significant event for your country and for you? How would you rate it in comparison with other events, such as the end of the World War II or achieved of future membership of your country in the European Union or NATO? We will start with Belgrade, and then we will continue with Chisinau and Banska Bystrica. Just switch on the mic. There is a...
Okay. In 1989, my home country, I'm in Serbia, was a part of Yugoslavia, as you know. Although Yugoslavia was not a part of the Eastern Bloc, but it was a socialist state, and the fall of the Berlin Wall had effect on the situation in our country. After that, socialist was replaced with multi-party one, which was the start of democratization of Yugoslavia. Soon after the breakdown of Yugoslavia was the process by which Serbia became an independent country. And when we talk about the end of World War II, we think that this was a similar process to the end of World War II, when Yugoslavia ideologically transitioned into a socialist state, because after 1989 it started its transition into a democratic one, although this process would be stopped, especially with the wars of the 90s, and only after the year 2000. We think that when our country becomes a part of the EU or NATO, this would not be the same level of change, because our country is already committed to democratic ideals and values, although it could do a significant amount to strengthen the democratic spirit in our country. Of course, this doesn't mean that it will not be an important historical moment, but we believe it will not be as great a change as the other historical events.
Thank you very much. Now Hisina has the floor.
Um,
Put the mic just directly.
okay. The fall of Berlin Wall is a very important event for all the former socialist countries and the transitioning economies of today. In Moldova, for example, in Chisinau, on November 7th, 1989, the students from our state university stopped a military parade organized by the USSR, which happened in parallel with the fall of the Berlin Wall. So we were discussing with our team members that the fall of the Berlin Wall was a wake-up call for the socialist countries to strive towards achieving independence. If we tried to rate the fall of the Berlin Wall compared with the other historical events, say well, the end of the World War II, we don't think that we could compare them, because if it's like a domino effect. The end of the World War II led to the division of the world, the power cells in the world. So then the fall of the Berlin Wall led to the fall of the USSR, which led to the fall of the Iron Curtain, which led to the independence of the states. But we did think that the fall of the Berlin Wall was similar to the Spring of Nations, 1848, when the states, the world countries, understood that they want to fight for their independence and find themselves as nations.
Wonderful. And now Team Banska Bystrica.
So the fall of Berlin Wall in 1989 was a great milestone in our national history. Some would say that thanks to this event, we could move forward in miles-long steps towards westernization, democratization of our own country. But others will say that this event didn't change Slovakia and Slovak culture in any ways. But the truth is that thanks to the fall of communism and fall of the Berlin Wall, we could move freely towards NATO, towards the European Union, and we could be part of the free world that we are currently living in. But is it really the truth? I mean, there is no, if you look at the current situation, not only in Slovakia, but abroad, all over the world, we could see a huge wave of anti-freedom movements, such as anti-Islamic, anti-Jewish, or USA/Russian thinking. So try to be a Muslim, try to be a pro-Russian or pro-USA thinker. You could quickly lose not only your friends, your husband, but also your job. And what's the difference between communism and the so-called free world that we currently living in? Thanks to it, if you just only express your opinion, you could be jailed in some countries, even in the European Union. That's it.
Thank you very much for your responses. Now we will go to the follow-up questions. Mary and Marek, you can retire, and I'd like to call Diana and Petra from Chisinau and Banska Bystrica, and Sofia, please, you could remain at the mic. Thank you. Do we have any questions for the students from the audiences on the 30th anniversary of the Berlin Wall? Is there anybody who wants to ask a question? Here in Banska Bystrica, no. Anybody else elsewhere? No, I don't see. Then I'll ask a question. When you are looking at the curricula of high schools and universities, do you think that there is enough attention devoted to the significance of the fall of the Berlin Wall and the fall of the communism? Or do you think that there needs to be more attention, or you are already fed up with what is being taught at the high schools and universities? What's your assessment? What's your opinion? And then we will start again with Sofia. And, thank you.
I don't know. In Serbia, we learn about communism and like wrong system, and when we talk about socialist country Yugoslavia, we have war in 19s. I don't know. I don't know really.
Okay, so there is no opinion. We will continue with Hisinau.
Okay, so in Chisinau, we are taught both mixed history. So, as a part of ex-communist or Soviet country, of course, we are taught about a lot of Soviet history, a lot of events that was it took place there, and also we are taught a lot about Romanian history and Moldova cooperation with Romania. So, in my opinion, regarding the Berlin Wall, I think that it is important to be included in more than one chapter, for example, 2 in history books. In order to understand this main event that provoked nations to fight for their freedom, to understand that Soviet way is not the only way to take in the previous years. So countries understood that another way, a democratic way, is more accessible and convenient. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now Banska Bystrica.
From my point of view, I think it's very important to learn much about this event because the fall of the Berlin Wall was very significant all over the states all over the world, and especially for our country. Because since the week after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the revolution took place in our history, which represent the right democracy. And as a new country, we want to integrate it to the organizations such as EU and NATO. And this event, the World Revolution, took a significant place in our history. So we are now celebrating 15 years in the EU. So I think it's very important to learn about this event. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else has another question from the audiences? No, in Banska Bystrica not. Anybody else in the audiences elsewhere? If not, then I'll thank you for your responses, and you may now take your seats with your teams. Thank you very much. And I'd like to call to the podium the representatives from the teams of Novi Sad and Sarajevo. I'd like to call Gojko and Amina. And then for the follow-up questions, I would like to call upon Anja from Novi Sad and Emir from Sarajevo. Thank you very much. Your time is running, so please, we are listening to Team Novi Sad.
The fall of the Berlin Wall, although very significant for the European countries, didn't really have much direct influence on Yugoslavia, because Yugoslavia had other more important issues to deal with at the time, like the ethnic conflicts that were growing, and the post-Tito crisis. Also, if I can rate it in comparison with other events in modern history, like World War II, it didn't have as direct of an influence as World War II. And yeah, that is basically it.
It's a very brief response, but thank you very much for that. Sarajevo, you have the floor.
Yes, about the fall of Berlin Wall, I want to say that it has impact on the Yugoslavia, and it contributed to the collapse of the Yugoslavia, since the fall of the Berlin Wall impacted on the rise of nationalism, and with nationalism we also bring to the wars in Yugoslavia, and specifically in, I will talk about my country, in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The main reason for the, let's say, the conflict, it's, according to my opinion, the rise of nationalism, and because each side wanted its territory, and they wanted to be just their nationalists in that country. Also, the fall of the Berlin Wall had the impact of the communism, because Russia wanted to bring the communism in these Yugoslavian countries, and I think that's it.
Thank you very much. For your responses, you may go back to your seats, and I'd like to call upon Anja and Amir to come to take the floor for the follow-up questions. Anybody has a question for the teams? Not here in Banska Bystrica? Oh, okay, there is a question. Please come here to the microphone.
Good day. Yeah, okay. While your presentation were given, you gave us quite negative opinion about nationalism. Is nationalism, in your opinion, only negative ideology, or it can be useful? Thank you.
For him? For Bosnia?
Yes. This is a question for both of you. But you have the opportunity to give him the floor.
I'm a lady.
Ladies first, I mean. But okay.
The lady actually was the first, and she gave you the microphone.
Okay, so in my opinion, I'm not a great supporter of nationalism. I believe that societies should work together in a way that is not found on only nationalistic interests, but in a more economic benefits of all the parties involved. And I especially disagree with the nationalism that is being implemented in my country specifically, because it is based on hatred of the other nationalities, and that is something that I believe is has a very negative influence, especially in a country which is separated on 3 ethnic groups that all have like a certain degree of power in that country, as is Bosnia and Herzegovina. So, in my opinion, I think the Berlin Wall was positive in the way that it made the steps forward towards the implementation of Western values and implementation of democracy, and moving forward to the European Union and the NATO. However, I believe that due to the rise of nationalism in the country, that it made a certain division that is not beneficial for the development of the country.
Well, wonderful. Now Novi Sad.
Well, we didn't mention the nationalism. Oh, sorry. We didn't mention the nationalism in a negative way, but I have to agree, because of the history of my country, that nationalism didn't, Yugoslavia, Serbia, and Bosnia, all of the ex-Yugoslavian countries, we didn't benefit from nationalism in at any point in history. So in my opinion, and from my history, personal history of my country, I have to agree with him. I don't. Nationalism can be a good thing in preserving values and culture, but when it comes to economic growth and political decisions, I think that nationalism should not be the thing that guides you through the decisions.
Great. I have a follow-up question to that question that was asked, and that is, do you think that there is a difference between nationalism and patriotism? And if so, where does that border between nationalism and patriotism actually lie? Where's the border in between them?
In my opinion, and I think, okay, in my opinion, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, patriotism is something that's in the individual person. So you can be a patriot. Is that one person? Yeah. You can love your country, and in a way that you work in it, you pay taxes, you do all the, you respect the laws, you respect the institutions, and you love your history, and you try to learn everything about it. You try to learn your mistakes and your bad things and good things, and that is patriotism, while nationalism is maybe identifying yourself with your nation, and that I'm trying to say it in English that's not gonna sound. Sometimes nationalists can identify themselves with their own people, and then they don't learn from their mistakes, but they try to say, okay, you did something bad, but that was good. So I don't know, cover up the mistakes of their own past.
What does Sarajevo think about it?
I have to agree. I believe that nationalism can be good in a way, but if we're going to make a separation, I believe that patriotism really is like identifying with your own nation, with your people, and working for the good and for the development of your own people and for your own country. However, my encounters with nationalism are basically that working to make your nationality better than the competing nationalities in your own country. So as long as your nationality is doing just a bit better than the others, it doesn't matter if it's bad in all ways. If it's doing just a bit better than the others, then it's fine. I believe that it's a way in indoctrinating people to accept that their poor way of life is acceptable in the name of in the name of like that national pride.
Thank you very much for your responses. Do we have any more questions here in Banska Bystrica? One more? Please come here. Sorry? Yes.
Well, actually, from the point of view of political theory, there is no difference between patriotism and nationalism. You are talking only about extreme ways of nationalism, but actually, without nationalism, Berlin Wall wouldn't happen, and actually the Soviet countries wouldn't represent and identify themselves as nations, and it wouldn't be possible to happen. So actually nationalism is a patriotism.
I have to say that some things that were good in history doesn't mean that they are good now. So if in some point in time nationalism was good for the world, right now it's not. In my opinion, you cannot.
I would also make a separation between political theory and political practice, because I think that while nationalism in theory it can be a positive thing, I believe the way it was implemented concretely in my country, because that was the question, I think that it was done poorly and that it has the negative effects that I was talking about. So
there will be another round that you can ask follow-up questions. There was a question here, and then there's a question over there. Come to the mic.
So, considering the happenings in Yugoslavia during the 90s, what do you think? What is the best way to stop and prevent the nationalism?
Preventing nationalism, I think it's a very difficult question, because I think the people inside the countries are led by nationalism today. It's very hard to like change that now, because the countries in the Balkans, in the ex-Yugoslavia, they didn't really benefit from the fact that they were part of the Ottoman Empire, they were part of Austro-Hungary, part of Yugoslavia, so they didn't really have the chance to really have their own nation state and go through the development that Europe and Western Europe did over time. So I think it's very hard to do that now, but building foundations on switching from like the extreme nationalism we have today, I think education and providing people like a quality alternative in ways that they can better their lives through different means, rather than just like this the name of nationalistic pride or anything of the sort.
Great. Novisad?
If I knew, I would be a politician.
That's a good response.
Yeah, I think education is really, really important in traveling, because they will politicians, political elites will always try to divide us, to conquer us. Then, so I really don't know how to stop it. I can only say the traveling and the education, because I know that that's the thing that broadens your horizons. So if I knew something else, I would send a mail to my president.
I would just like to add to this that I think meetings like this are very beneficial to that, in the ways that people from, for example, from Yugoslavia get to meet each other and see that we are not really how our media is presenting us. You know, that I, as a Bosnian, can meet students from Serbia, from Montenegro, or from Croatia one day, maybe from Slovakia, Moldova, and see that the media is presenting them in a stereotypical way, and that it's not all that way, all like the way that they are telling us.
Wonderful. With that response, you both can retire. I thank you for your responses. There was a question here which will be asked in the following round, so just remember it, and I'll call upon you as the first one. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to call Bratislava and Podgorica. Lucia and Slaven, would you come to the floor, please? Lucia has an opportunity to decide whether she will start or she will pass the mic.
Okay.
Please look into the camera.
Okay, thank you.
It should be on upstairs.
Okay, I hope they're hearing me. With the fall of the
Please keep quiet in the audience. Thank you.
With the fall of the Berlin Wall in Slovakia, it also means the fall of the totalitarian regime, because it was like the biggest event in the modern history, not only for the Slovakia but also for the Czech Republic, because it leads to the Velvet Revolution. But the fall of the totalitarian regime doesn't mean that it also the people mentality changed. After that, we have like the opportunity to get the freedom, free vote, and choose better. But I think that it cannot happen. The really hard years are coming, and we call it the machoism, and because of that, our joining to the NATO was declined. I know I'm a little bit critical, but a few years after, we successfully joined to the NATO and for the EU. We declared that we belong to the West and we belong to the EU. We are democracy, and we are really should be proud of that. But with the change of that doesn't mean that our fight for the democracy ends. After almost 30 years after, our democracy was kicked because the investigative journalist Jan Kuciak was brutally murdered, and we once once another, we must show that we are democracy, we are standing for that, and people got march and declared that we are the democracy. And one of that marches, which was the like thousands of people, was spoken that we are that what we are waiting for, and we must continue in the same fight which our parents started.
Thank you very much. Now Podgorica has the floor.
So after the fall of Berlin Wall, we saw decline of the popularity of communism. And because of that, after that in Montenegro, they decided to choose more Western and more liberal approach to guiding one country. They did decide that we should go in EU integration and that we should try to be a member of NATO. We successfully managed to be part of NATO, and because of that we are happy, because now we are military safe, because we are a small country. Depending on, do I like that we are guided through the liberalization and to the Western values? I like that, because when my father talked to me, how was his childhood, I see that he suffered a lot because there were no food in the stores. You cannot leave the country without permission. And nowadays in Montenegro, you can buy whatever you want. You can go out whenever you want. You are not that much concerned about what you are talking, because you have a right to tell everything. While Montenegro was the country guided by the communism, it was not possible. Because of that, we as Montenegro are really proud on our country and of its path. Montenegro is right now the leader in the EU integration process, and we are going good through the all that chapters that EU wants us to follow. We have some of them to close, and we are hoping that we will become a part of EU in about 4 to 5 years. And we think that the fall of Berlin Wall influenced much more our country than, for example, World War II, in which we suffered a lot and which did not change any of our standings and the opinions about the world, because we, after World War II, continued to be a communist country.
Thank you very much for your responses. Now we will have an opportunity for the questions from the floor. Is there any question from the audiences anywhere else? No, I don't see anybody, but there was a question here in Banska Bystrica. Would you come here and take the mic?
Thank you. In the previous round, it was argued some particular about ideologies and political theories. It was mentioned that nationalism was good ideology one time. So I'd like to ask you 2 questions. First, is nationalism a harmful ideology for your country? And if yes, what ideology do you think is good for your country?
Go ahead.
Okay. So nationalism, because of our current opposition in parliament, is being used as a bad thing, because a lot of Montenegrins are afraid that if this current current ruling party fall, that we will lose our country and then that we will become united with Serbia. I think that nationalism in that way in Montenegro is really bad. But we need to talk about nationalism as seeing history and not forgetting what your people have done in the past. In Montenegro, that is really common, that you forget what your ancestors did and your grandfather did, and you just let that history go and do not follow that, and do not get any knowledge, or you do not get wiser because something happened in your past. So we think that, as in Montenegro, that nationalism is good in some manner, pure nationalism, not politically directed nationalism, because I do not think that Montenegro should forget some great things that happened in our past that were done when the Montenegro was united with Serbia and other countries, because the current ruling parties in Montenegro is saying that we and Serbs do not have anything in common, and that we are just come to exist after 2006.
Bratislava.
the nationalism isn't bad at all, not for the Slovakia, because the history of the Slovakia is like being the nationalist. It's like being the really good Slovak, thinking about looking for your tradition. What are you for your language? Be proud to being the Slovak. But now being the nationalist is like being more. It's like a little bit misunderstanding and changing for some fascist or maybe other totalitarian. It's like they're really mixed with the not really good bad things, and I don't think that the nationalism is like the good option for the Slovakia. Maybe that some another healthy nationalism, like looking for the tradition, but not for looking for that, like because now the nationalism like differentiating the people in Slovakia. For me, only from my personal opinion, it's maybe the liberalism, the best way, like tolerated all of the people in not only Slovakia but in the EU.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Any other questions here? Any other questions anywhere else? If not, then please go back to your seats. Thank you very much for your responses. We are going to discuss now the second question, and I'd like to invite to the floor the representatives from the teams of Chisinau and Novi Sad. I'd like to call upon Tatiana and Radomir to come to the floor. And the question is about the European Union. Since its founding, the European Union has offered a model of cooperation which was able to give prosperity and security to its citizens. Do you think that the EU's potential or best years are behind it? Or do you think that there is still a potential that we can tap and use and benefit from? And what are your expectations from the European Union in general?
Well, that's a tricky question to ask right now with Brexit going on and all, but I'll try to answer it. Well, it could be either ways. It could be that its best years are behind it. Also, it could be that its best years are yet to come, because we need to see what's happening with Brexit. I think that many countries in Europe, if Brexit actually happens on 12th of April, will use opportunity to make its to take those businesses from UK and to grow its economies. So yeah, I think that its years are that the best years of European Union actually might yet come. I'm sorry.
Chisinau?
Our team thinks that the golden age of European Union is only coming, and I think that the UK also understand that, and that's why Brexit process now is slowing down. We also think that expected big enlargement will also encourage the EU potential, and although that EU is now facing a lot of problems like migration, mass migration, Brexit, and EU skepticism, its upcoming elections are going only to strengthen the EU, and they are the representation of democracy that EU tries to promote to all the countries from all the world, and our expectations from the EU is only a closer cooperation, and we want to say that since we collaborate with the EU, our products became only more competitive, and that's why we think that through this tight collaboration, our country will become more attractive for future cooperations with other countries, it will become more secure and attractive for FDIs, for example. That's our main point is that EU golden age is only coming.
Wonderful. So you are both optimistic, but I'd like to come back to Novi Sad and ask, so what are your expectations from the European Union? If you think that the best years are still yet in front of the European Union?
Well, now European Union is facing that threat, that rise of right wings in Europe that think that the European Union isn't good enough for its people. So now European Union has its opportunity to show how strong it is with Brexit. It all depends on its position towards Brexit and how they will behave towards UK. If they get benefits from all of that, if European Union gets benefits from Brexit and shows that it's still strong and empower economies of other countries that aren't so rich, like Germany and France, then those right-wingers will have problem in critique of European Union, and people will faith in European Union will be returned to people. So yeah.
Thank you. Do we have, yes, please come here. Do we have any other questions in the other audiences? So we have a question here in Banska Bystrica.
Hello. I would like to ask you. A question that, despite the fact that you give us everything, the democratic institutions, independence, but on the other hand, do you think that the EU, in some measure, limits our independence, or especially the independence of our countries?
Well,
Thank you. So does the EU limit independence of its member countries?
Well, of course it does. I mean, that's part of being in union with someone. You just give up some of your independence, but in order to benefit other things like economies, cultural exchange, free traveling. So you have to give up something in order to have something that's good for you. So giving up some kind of independence might not be bad as we think it is in today's world. I think that working together and being strong together is much more important than being independent and being on your own in today's world. I think that you can't really be on your own in this world today.
That was a very nice phrase that you had. Yes, thank you for that.
I totally agree with my colleague, but when you want something to receive, you of course you are going to pay something, and I think that a little bit of independence is worth to pay in order to achieve all the benefits that you can grant us.
Satisfied with the response? Anybody else has a question? There is a question in the team, but I'll give the floor first to the students and then to the teams. Yes, come here.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. And talking about the streets for European Union, you mentioned about the right-wing rising popularization, and I want to ask you: do you count the Hungary and Poland rising nationalism as a real threat for European Union? And for example, can they make a huge influence on the elections to European Parliament on the May in this year?
Yeah, first. Well, I don't think that nationalism in Hungary is that kind of big threat, because they are on the boundaries of European Union, and they done what country on the border, I think that would do in any other situation, close its borders. And President of Hungary just took opportunity of that policy, which I think that might be some hidden policy of EU, and took opportunity of that to increase its own popularity in Hungary and to firm his position. About Poland, I don't know that I can answer about that state, because I'm not sure what's happening there right now. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm not very close to the issues which are going in Hungary and Poland, but I'm an optimistic person. That's why I think that upcoming elections are that EU population are going to make a right decision, and everything will be right.
Thank you, Tatiana. Thank you, Radomir. You may take the floor. And now, for the question, I'd like to call upon Alexandra and Dorje to come to the floor. And these are the teams: Chisinau and Novi Sad. Okay. Wait for the question, please. You have the floor.
Good morning. I have somewhat hypothetical question for you. Do you think it is possible for your country to act as some kind of neutral state between the so-called East and West? Or do you think countries in contemporary world simply have to ally themselves with one side or another? Is it possible is there a place for such a neutrality in today's world? I would like to know your point of view. Thank you.
Excellent question.
I think that you have to align with someone, especially smaller countries, medium-sized countries. I think they have to align with someone. We can use a comparison of Yugoslavia. There was in between. There was really neutral, but I think what gave the possibility to Yugoslavia to be neutral at the time were the international circumstances. So they were between the blocks, and of course, with good political decisions, they could stay neutral. They could form like a third bloc with the non-aligned countries. But now I think the situation in the world is not as close as it was then, and that countries have to choose where they were aligned to. Now, my country, Serbia, is somewhere in between, because we are officially for the EU and want to continue our European Union integrations. But on the other side, we're closely connected to Russia. We're both Slavs, we're both Orthodox, and so on. And those are things that I think should not be neglected, should not be ignored, because that's the thing that connects countries and their people very much. So I think my country is trying to stay non-aligned, but I think in the end, they will have to align to one side or the other.
Thank you. Now, Chisinau.
First of all, I would like to mention that Moldova officially is a neutral country. But the situation is going like a little bit of background about our country, that we have been together with Romania, but after that we have been a part of USSR. And you know that in our country we are speaking both Romanian and Russian language. Being part of European Union, Romania as a strategic partner of Moldova gives us a lot of priorities, and we tend to achieve the same standards as they did. But at the same time, we have a support of the Russian Federation from the GCC countries, and it's really important to choose. But we don't have this possibility to choose, because being a small country, as my colleague mentioned, do not offers us a lot of possibilities to make a choice, like to make our own choice. But I want to say that. From 2015, Moldova is oriented for European Union, because 66% of our trade is going to the European market. Our standards are going to be at the same standard of European market. So it's like a logical things to go through the some part, because you see European Union as like a star to which you are oriented. So being neutral, in which part to be neutral? Like a neutral state, so to keep our sovereignty, we still keep it.
even to be a part of European Union or to be a part to keep us as a Republic of Moldova. I mean, not to go to the Russian Federation, but it's impossible. Like.
Thank you very much. Do we have more questions here? Yes, but come here to the podium. But you may take your seats, and we will go with another team, and you will ask the questions to another team. Thank you, Alexandra. Thank you, George. And now I'd like to invite to the floor teams Banska Bystrica, Sarajevo, and Podgorica. Filip, Vezirka, and Goran, please. You have 2 minutes to answer the question about the European Union, about its potential, and about your expectations from the European Union. And then we will go with the follow-up questions with a different setup for the team. Go ahead. Yes.
Thank you.
Banska Bystrica, you have the floor.
Well, from my point of view, a lot of the future situation in the European Union will say, for example, in my country, upcoming elections for the European Parliament, it can show a very nice, nicely show attitude or the position of people, ordinary people in country. How do they see European Union and what they don't like or like, or it can be very useful for the competent ones in Brussels to think about the future and to think about the relationship between the European Union and its institutions and the ordinary people, because it's the basic of a good and prosper society in the European Union, and we can handle our future, and we can handle the best years. We can think about best years in the future, just on the basic relationship between the European Union and its institutions and ordinary people. Maybe in the upcoming elections in my country, in Slovak Republic, the number of people who will come to vote will low, and as in the previous years. But it's also a good information and some kind of response to competent ones in Brussels, as I mentioned, and it can be the tool how to handle future, and we just don't need to think about negatively like the best years are behind us. That's not very pragmatic position, and I think that there is still much work to do, and the best years can just come in the nearest future. Thank you.
Thank you, Filip. Now, Podgorica, you have the floor.
So I agree that we can't yet know if the future is going to be bright for the EU, but we might get an idea after the EU elections, and when we see how the EU handles the Brexit and with what terms does the Britain go out of the EU. But what we think, what are the positives of the EU is for the undeveloped countries in Europe, it has a model, because they have to let's skip that. They might have to fulfill conditions to join to the EU. But we can't forget that in 2008, 2009, there was an economic crisis, and Greece almost went bankrupt, and the same almost happened to the Italy and to the Spain. So if we watch analysis and listen to the professionals, they say in 2020 it might happen again. The economic crisis might strike again. So maybe the greatest challenge for the EU is yet to come. So we will see if the EU comes to the terms with that and steps that challenge over. That would be that. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. When we talk about the European Union, and we are quite optimistic about the future of the European Union, and we see a European Union that has a bright future when in the upcoming years. But there are certain challenges that the World Economic Forum listed for the European Union. Those are moving from the towards a human-centered economy. It basically means that the European Union should move from investing in the private corporations more into the human capital, into human resources. The other is also now we have a migration crisis, and there should be a specific management of migration and the borders that the European Union needs to establish in order to have the safety inside the European Union, and as well to make the European Union as a multicultural society as it should be, and to also include those migrants that are migrating from the other countries in their society. The other thing is that the European Union is facing right now is there should be a specific rule on how the threats threats to the public safety should be administered. So there should be like a mutual cooperation between the countries that are increasing in the public safety and increasing in the peace stability inside their countries. However, our expectations, my country is trying to join the EU, and our expectations would be that we are looking for the security. First of all, we are looking for the peace, protection of the human rights, and as well, we are interested in the economic situations. So when we are entering to the EU, we are kind of expecting of European Union to protect our economy and also to improve our economy and develop it much more. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You may go back to your seats, and I'd like to call Alena, Medisa, and Marko. That's Banska Bystrica, Sarajevo, and Podgorica. You will ask a question.
So, hello. My question is, as it was mentioned, there will be elections happening in May. And my question is if you think it will be harder to join European Union, or the situation will be the same, or if will it change? Thank you.
May I start? Okay.
Yes.
First of all, I would like to ask you what you mean by could you repeat the question, please?
The question was about the European elections, but
yeah, but I just got lost a bit.
So, firstly, if it is possible, or if there is a real possibility that your country will join the European Union, and
well, if I know my country is in European Union,
or it was
if,
for
good.
the countries which are not in EU.
And what's my question?
It was for not.
Why don't you wait for the question and then you will answer it, because I think you are quicker than the question. So let's go with the question and then you.
The question is for not EU countries. So
go ahead.
After the elections, which will be happening in May, do you think it will be the same, the process of joining the EU, or it will be much harder for your country? Thank you.
I personally think that it will be harder since, according to the estimations, the far-right parties are probably winning these elections in many European countries, particularly, for instance, in Italy, France, even in Germany, when the Merkel is going from the political stage, when there is no true liberal democratic leader. I personally think that the countries such as Bosnia and Herzegovina doesn't have the support inside the European Union in this particular moment. And I really think that the priority for our country is joining the NATO, and we got the green light for that. And my country personally is involving much in the NATO accession than in the EU accession. But I think that if the far-right party win the elections, there will be certain created problems that will have to be overcome by the help of the countries which are not the members of the European Union, but which are really important players, especially Eastern Balkan countries. And I think that at that particular moment, my country will be able to give to European Union something that they will be in need of.
I do agree that the criteria will be much stricter, but I also believe that it should be stricter. We've seen post-socialist countries entering the EU on much lighter terms, such as Bulgaria, Romania, and then Croatia in 2013, and that has caused a significant amount of problems because you cannot let countries such as Serbia, Montenegro, Bosnia and Herzegovina, post-socialist countries, enter the European Union as a great political organization, a huge political organization on light terms. So I believe that the criteria should be stricter, because if the EU continues to accept members based on results which are not too great, it will only lower its own strength. So I believe that it will be stricter and that it should be stricter, because if we want a more stable European Union, then we need more stable member states themselves.
Thank you, and I'll just rephrase the question for Banska Bystrica, and that is, after the European elections, will it be more difficult or easier for the countries that are aspiring to join the European Union to accede, in your opinion?
In my opinion, I don't think it's going to be harder to join the EU, because as we know, there is still Brexit. So the country is leaving the EU, and we need to, European Union needs to expand. So we need to join like more countries in it, and we need to provide the unity of Europe.
Thank you. There was a question there. You have one more question? Thank you.
Thank you. So today we are talking about politics, but considering the work and job market and education, I would like to ask you, is the human capital flight, or known as brain drain, one of the big future problems, considering the question, let's say, of Croatia? Because when we consider that we have some new member states that are actually bearing with these problems, how would you like to characterize it? As something pretty bad for the European Union, or something that will actually lead to some other reform, or maybe some new, well, let's say, policy? Thank you.
So for the European Union itself, I don't think it's particularly bad as long as those people stay in the territory of the European Union in its member states. But I think that on a larger scale, it is a huge problem for individual countries. For instance, my country, Montenegro, has a lot of problem with brain drain, and estimates show that by, for instance, 2030, we will have much less talented, ambitious, capable young people in our country. For the EU as a whole, it can be good, as I've said, as long as they stay in the EU. But then again, we need to take into consideration that it lowers the strength and the capabilities of individual countries, and the EU needs strong member states in order to be a strong international organization holding those states together. So I believe when it comes to particular policies, that the EU should invest even more in education, in mobility, so that young people can have the opportunity to spend some time abroad, take something out of that, and then come back to their own country. But we also need to realize that the young people, of course, are going to want to leave if they don't have enough opportunity in their own country. So the EU should definitely work on strengthening its member states, candidates, and potential candidates in order for young people to stay in those countries. Because if those countries fall apart inside themselves and the people are somewhere else in the European Union, generally long-term would be a danger to the EU, definitely.
Thank you, Podgorica. Now Banska Bystrica.
So in my personal view, I think it's kind of a good thing in a way, because every action takes its reaction. So if something like this happened to our country or any other country, I believe that European Union could, like in diplomatic way, fight for their beliefs, and they could improve in ways that we know they failed, and they know it as well. So maybe this is the way how they could, reform themselves, or have the idea of reformation, something like that.
Thank you, Banska Bystrica. Sarajevo, please.
Particularly about the brain drain and the bad economy in Bosnia and Herzegovina, I would love to bring it in the connection with the fall of the communism and the Berlin Wall. Well, I think that Berlin Wall bring down the communism, but it created, particularly in the Balkans, something that is called authoritarian capitalism, which means that we have liberal market which is controlled by the state administration. And for instance, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, many private companies are state-owned. And I think that it's also a case in the many Balkan countries that where, for instance, tenders are made by for the will of few companies. There is no competition in the market. We don't have strong antitrust laws and so on. And I think that such authoritarian capitalism, which is created the fact that you have people who are willing to change it, but who don't have a platform, they are living in the country. But I think if we would change it, we would actually be a good model for the European country to deal with that, because I particularly think that the European country will face in the future some problems that we are facing right now in the Balkan, since the far-right parties are very raising inside the European Union. So therefore, I think that some things that we overcame in the transition period could be a good model for the European Union in the future. Therefore, I think that our membership inside the European Union would be good. And also, I would love to say that one of the problems for the EU economy is that actually they are not dealing that much with sustainable industry development and so on as the China, Japan, USA are doing, and they are the leading economic powers in the world. And they should not look upon them as partners, but as a counter partners with whom they should be equally competitive. Therefore, I think the European Union in the future will be forced to more think about the industry in the form of removing from the atoms to the bits, or removing from the production to the information production, which actually USA, China, and Japan are doing, and India right now. Therefore, I think that one of the problems that the European Union has right now is the sustainable development that it has to overcome. And since the Balkan countries have many well-educated, good people who could provide them with many solutions, I think that the accession of these countries inside the European Union would be a great movement.
Thank you, Marisa, Alena, and Marco. You may retire. And I'm calling upon Nikola from Belgrade and Tomasz from Bratislava to take the floor. We are coming to answering the question about the European Union, its potential and your expectations from the EU.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
So we can clearly see that these are not the best times for Europe and the European project. But despite the current crisis, we believe that the European Union is far from hopeless right now. Just like the dangers and challenges of the past, the EU must concentrate now on addressing some key problems and taking the necessary steps to address these problems. And to prevent serious damage to the Union. It is also necessary to listen to the most vocal critics of the European Union, we believe, to find out what aspects of the project need to be reformed. We cannot dismiss all critics of the European Union as, right-wing populist Eurosceptics, but we must acknowledge the points that they can make about how the European Union can be reformed and become a more democratic or legitimate structure in the eyes of the European people. The EU can emerge from these troubles as a stronger, more coherent community, but it will take hard work and it will take will from political actors that keeping such a complex union has always required in some capacity. As young students, on the other hand, we believe that our expectations are chiefly in the field of academic connections, exchange programs and greater educational and career opportunities that the EU can offer us. This is something that young people in our country are chiefly concerned with when it comes to the European Union. So that's...
Thank you, Belgrade. Bratislava, you have the floor.
So as my colleague already said, it is true. It is really true that the European Union have some challenges in front or in the time that will come. But some say that there are even much more problems and that the European Union won't be any better than it was until now. For example, there is a Brexit. Also, the initiation processes or the accession processes of the new countries are really slow and are very stagnated for the last few years. And also, some say that the Europe can't really handle the migration crisis and the asylum
and a common asylum system. But in my opinion, there are 3 points why the European Union will be stronger from now on. First of all, we all countries that are here have some young people, the young generations, which were raised with no war. And this is really important because these people are not willing to fight, and we can see it on the plenty of charts. For example, less than 80% of people of the young generation are, less than 8% of the young generations are willing to join the army. And this trend is like the continuous, less and less younger generations are joining the army. The second of all, as my colleague already said, the critique that is constructive is really good and really needed within the European Union, because we can pretty much see that the critique from not alternative and fascist parties are really constructive, and by this we can really build the new European Union on. And also, even though we have some alternative fascist and Nazist parties and so on, and the rise of these parties in our countries, we can teach something from them, and we can really overcome our differences. For example, conservative and liberal parties, and we can work together as a one bloc, also in the European Parliament, for example, and we can pretty much be strong together and to join together to face these threats. And what do I expect for the European Union? Actually, all around the world, outside of the European Union, there are conflicts right now, military conflicts and so on. So first of all, the European Union have to be secure, have to have the defense and stuff, and the security is the first thing that I expect. And also the second thing is some sort of federalization, because we reached some of the level of European integration, but there are also many other institutions which we could integrate much more. For example, common asylum system. We could focus more on common educational system, because the educational systems over the Europe and over the countries of the Europe are really different. For example, in Finland, it's really great educational system. In Slovakia, it is not. And there are also many more areas where we can actually integrate much more, and I hope we will. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Nicola, you may go back to your seat. Marco, would you kindly take the floor for the follow-up questions? Follow-up questions, yes, we have a question here in Banska Bystrica. Would you come here to take the floor? Do we have any questions? Okay, I see a question there. Any other audience?
So hello everyone. So I have a question for Slovakia. Do you think it's good to be part of the European Union? Okay. Is it good to be part of the European Union? And as we mentioned, is everyone have advantages and disadvantages in our country? And so do you think the nationalism can destroy our relationships with the European Union and in your country?
Wonderful. Actually, two questions. Did you get them? Whether it's good to be in the European Union, and secondly, whether nationalism is destroying our countries. That's it? Wonderful.
Okay, so first question, yes, it is best. Is this the best feeling to be in the European Union, because you have the 4 freedoms, you can move freely, and all other stuff. You have the prosperity, the stability, the security, and so on. So there are like trillion or even more areas for what the be part of the European Union is really good. And the second question was about destroying, or so if, well, I'm not quite sure, because first of all, I'm also a patriot. So under the political theory that we heard here, I'm also a nationalist. I'm sorry. In some sense, yes, it can hurt really bad. But when we are looking at the, for example, Kotleba party of Slovakia, they are not like the normal nationalist, I would say, because they are actually saying the things that never happens in history, and they are trying to remake the history so they could have a have some right to exist and so on. So in my opinion, the normal nationalism with the good arguments, with the logical arguments, is not a bad thing, I would say. Even in the European Union, the countries have to be some sort of have to take a look on the national interest of their country. So nationalism, I'm sorry, is not at all the bad things, and is not like the nationalism alone cannot destroy our country or the European Union. It's the people.
Thank you, Bratislava. Now, Belgrade, you have the floor.
Okay, when it comes to the first question, I believe that it's very good thing for every country to be a part of a European community. And in the era of globalization, I think that every kind of integration is important and beneficial for the country. And I think that it's also important, beside the economic impacts and the benefits, it's important to be a part of a community which shares the sense of belonging to, and which is committed to democratic values. So I think that in many aspects, it's good for a country to be a part of a European Union. And when it comes to a problem of nationalism in the in the countries of the European Union, for example, on the example of Slovakia, we can see that on the presidential elections, somebody who is nationalist didn't won. So I think that liberal and more democratic candidates and politicians in the European Union are still the ones who are mostly dominant on the European scene.
Thank you. There was a question from Podgorica.
If you want.
So my question is for the colleague from Serbia, but I will rephrase it for the colleague from Slovakia. Do you believe that the protests currently happening, for instance, in Albania, Montenegro, and Serbia will affect the European integration, and will they eventually be supported by the European Union, such as in the previous periods of the 21st century? And for the colleague from Slovakia, if you are aware of the issue of these protests, how do you think the EU should react in your perspective, and how do you think the member states of the EU should turn to that problem? Thank you.
Firstly, when it comes to Serbia, our government is committed to European integration. So I'm not sure if it is important. So I'm not sure if the protests which are currently being in Serbia, if they are important for European Union. But I don't know if some kind of more dangerous situation happens here, I mean in Serbia. I think that European Union has to make some initiative, and I'm not really sure if it will if it will be for the current government or for the people who protest. And when it comes to Montenegro and Albania, I think that the situation is pretty similar.
I would actually disagree with this. First of all, European Union is not a project that would be or that should be used to promote. It should be used to promote democratic values, but not by the supporting, some side or another in the country. Because this, for example, in Serbia or in Albania, this is actually to become a European member, and also to have the mindset of the European, of the European Union. You have to do it alone. Like you have to have it inside you, and you have to try your best. So, for example, in Slovakia, there were protests last year, and nothing happened. Like many world media just write about it, but the European Union cannot really step inside and say, "Oh, you are the good party, and we would support you," and stuff like this. You know, it's all the thing of this country, because European Union has only, if I'm not mistaken, have only 7 total competencies, and some of the mixed competencies within the member states, and the supporting some party or another is not a part of it. So
thank you very much. Are there any other questions here or elsewhere? Is it this topic, or you would like to have it for the next topic? Is it still this topic? Well, okay, go ahead. I'll allow it, and then we will continue with the last question.
So I would like to ask you about enlargement of the EU, and my question is, if there would be more and more country members, will the EU be able to offer the same or equal conditions for each of the member states? Thank you.
Okay, well, it's a difficult question, but I think that it's a logical way that European Union should enlarge and should include the European countries which want to be a part of that community, and which fulfill all the requirements in that field. So I think that when a country is ready to become part of the European Union, I think that it is that it will be not impossible for European Union to cope with that country. So I think that some kind of well, I think that it will not be impossible for European Union to okay. It will not be impossible for the European Union to make all countries satisfied in that community. Okay.
Okay, so it is a really good question, I would say, because within the European Union, there are member states with, for example, lower quality of food. Slovakia is one of them. And also, not every country in the European Union have same conditions with, for example, with some negotiations and stuff. So there are differences in the European Union, and it is one of the challenges that we have to resolve right now, because the European population is trying to say, like, yeah, we entered the European Union to increase our economy and to get along with the Germany, for example, in Slovakia case. We wanted to be as a Germany, but it doesn't happen. I understand that this is the thing that we have to do, like the Slovakians, but also European Union have to try to make it possible for different countries to reach the level of quality of life, of prosperity and stability. So yes, and on the second part of the questions, yes, European Union should enlarge of the Balkan countries and of the Moldova also. But first of all, these countries, have to fulfill the criteria and also have to finish all the chapters that European Union opened with them. But we will see what will happen if the Serbia, if the Montenegro and so on would able to keep up the pace with the European countries. But in my opinion, we have to firstly resolve the problem of the different quality of life in the European countries, and then we can talk if the Serbia and different countries can fulfill it too.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you, Marko. Thank you, Tomasz. We are now going to our third question, and I'd like to call to the floor the teams from Podgorica and Belgrade. I'd like to call Lazar and Jovana to the floor. And we have a question about NATO. 70 years after its founding, what, in your opinion, is the role of NATO? Is it still relevant? Is it providing security to its member states, or is it an irrelevant organization which actually hinders international security? What's your opinion? We can start with Podgorica, and then we will go with Belgrade. Yeah, please.
America is the main country in NATO. America is the main country in NATO alliance, and she using her influence to get economic power and political power. Because of that, we can question if the NATO is good for global security or not. There are some evidence that there is some actions of NATO led to creation of terrorist group, which means that terrorists can lead to terrorists can strike anytime, anywhere, and that is lowering the level of global security. On the another side, the NATO is providing the peace in South China Sea. That's it.
So hello, everyone. First of all, I would like to start and to emphasize that we should be aware that Serbia has a really troubled relationship with NATO, and that is a consequence of the happenings in the 90s. So we feel a need to acknowledge this. As we can see, the nature of NATO has changed a lot. We have that it was a defensive alliance, and now we have a more wide military alliance. And so we can notice that the role of NATO is a little bit unclear, but on the other hand, it's good because it's a contributor to security, because it has been spreading to so many countries that it made impossible to have the conflict between them. So for the future, I think that it remains to be seen if NATO will be possible to keep up with the challenges, and especially because we have maybe they will endanger its stability. For example, we have changing attitudes of the United States administrations or future European defense. Thank you.
Thank you very much to both of you. Now we have the floor for the questions. Any question here? Okay, there's a question here in Banska Bystrica. Is there any question in any of the other audiences? No? Then we will go with the question from Banska Bystrica.
My question is probably connected to the European Union and NATO both. So, as you may heard, there were some ideas of creating of the common European Union army. There were some 5 years ago or 4 they were discussed. But in connection with the nowadays US policies, those ideas started to be discussed more actively. So my questions are easy. Will this army alternate NATO in the future, and how will it develop? How this army will develop after withdrawal of country with one of the most powerful army in the world, and this is the Great Britain.
Thank you. Podgorica, you want to start?
if you want me
Passing the
to
baton to
yeah.
Belgrade. Okay, Belgrade, go ahead.
So first of all, I'm really proud that our country has a neutral position. So I think it's really the best thing to keep up with. And I think it would be a great alternative for European Union to have European army. And so in that way, we will be more independent and they will not be dependent from the NATO. So in that case, I think that it would be really great for European Union to work more about European army.
Lazar, what do you think about it? If you don't want to say anything,
I don't know.
okay, fair enough. Podgorica is quiet on the second question. Any other questions for Belgrade and Podgorica? Not here, so thank you. Thank you, Ivana. Thank you, Lazar, for your answers. And now I'd like to ask the floor Chisinau, Sarajevo, and Bratislava. And that will be Liliana, Miriam, and Carolina, please. And we are coming back to talking about NATO, its relevance, and its 70th anniversary. So please go ahead.
So the question is still NATO relevant in today's day? NATO is not the same as what it used to be back in the day. It's not only involved in, as we say, common a common protection of the states, but now it is also involved in medical cooperation or in the medical field. It is also involved in the protection in the case a natural disaster happens. They are also involved in public diplomacy, so in order to increase transparency between these countries. And again, what was the first purpose of NATO? To keep Russia at bay, to keep it in its place. So is it still doing that? Well, it depends who you ask. If we would go to Norway and ask them, is still NATO relevant? Is it still needed? Yes. If we would go to Estonia, maybe some Estonians think that it would be like showing a red cloth to a bull, so making Russia more aggressive. And if we'd go to EU is even more interested in NATO because they want to increase the investment they have into NATO. They want to increase it to 2% of GDP until 2024. And now with North Macedonia's and Montenegro's accession to NATO, there is also an interesting topic. And even with Georgia's and Ukraine's willingness to also be more cooperative with NATO, it's also irrelevant. So it is interesting to see who you ask when you ask, is NATO still relevant? So it is up to NATO to keep itself relevant, in my opinion.
Thank you. Now Sarajevo, please.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. So first of all, we should remember why the NATO is created, as well as the NATO that has to remember why it is created. So, for example, first of all, is to promote peace and stability to promote European values. So I would raise the same question: why actually? What is the role of NATO today after the fall of communism? So does it has any impact nowadays? But also, I should raise the question what the NATO is doing with other countries, because it is trying to bring a peace and stability and a security and to promote European values in other countries such as Syria, Libya, and etc. But unfortunately, this is the process that they are going through is not that progressive. And also, I would like to raise the point that actually NATO itself should try to figure out and focus what actually they want and what's their aim in strengthening other and protecting other countries. So, for example, even coming to Balkan countries. So basically, they had a certain role when it comes to Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina and Kosovo. So basically, they should before they try to intervene with such countries, they have to have a plan and toward the implementation, what they will do before the conflict rise, and what they will do after the conflict in a certain territory. So basically, what they have to do is they have to maintain peace before the conflict, and they have to maintain and find a plan after the conflict, what they actually will do toward the reconciliation. So basically, they intervene in this territory, but they did not succeed later on. So basically, that made Serbia go out from the NATO NATO, and so basically that's why NATO has to admit their mistakes. NATO has to work with those countries, and NATO has to bring peace and stability, basically to remember its role all over again. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarajevo. Now, Bratislava.
Thank you. So the question was if the NATO is still a garant for our security, and I would say without any hesitation that yes, it is still the biggest garant of our security and our only possible option as for the states of the EU for the guarantee of security. We, as the states of the EU, don't have enough military competences to provide peace and security all over, because after the Second World War, we stopped developing our military capacities, and thus we need some military superpower, as for example is USA, so they can help us from the potential threats as from the aggressive policies of Russia, or from the growing power of China or India. Because, for example, Russia has 24,000 tanks. China has at least 5 million active soldiers. So, yeah, I would say that the NATO is still the guaranteed power for us as for the European Union.
Thank you very much for your responses. Now we have the floor for the questions, for the follow-up questions. Anybody has a question? Okay, there is a question. There's a second one. You were the first, please. Yeah.
Hello. I would like to know your point of view to my question. During the administration of Donald Trump in the White House, we could hear some critical comments on the American position in NATO, that they have a lot of duties and other countries in NATO are not fulfilling their duties. Do you think the other European NATO members should be worried about the future in NATO and the American presence in NATO as the biggest donor? I think it's unquestionable, or it's just empty threat? What do you think about it? Thank you.
So with US's tendency now to get out of most of their cooperation. So we know that they want to go out of NAFTA, for example. Do they want to do the same with NATO? I don't think so. For me, in my opinion, NATO for the US is a way to sort of smoothly get into Europe or into Europe's business in a way. And yes, US does contribute a lot to NATO. So this is why, as I mentioned before, Europe wants to increase its contribution to NATO to 2% of GDP before 2024. So I don't think it should be a threat, but it probably their cooperation or the way they cooperate should be reconsidered or changed in a way to be more efficient.
Thank you, Kristina. Sarajevo.
So as I already said, NATO has to work toward the progress, toward its first steps. Basically, they had to implement few steps again. So basically, what's the position of NATO today is some kind of a similar position of EU today. So basically, if EU fall, we have to arise the question: what will happen with NATO? So basically, what NATO has to do, all of those countries has to work together toward the progress, toward the implementation, toward the peace and sustainability and security. So basically, they have to provide those countries that they are making intervention in, they had to provide them security and peace and stability to show them that they are actually important and they are actually they are good enough to protect them, basically. So yeah, when it comes to United States and other countries, all of the countries has to give its potential to work toward the unification and toward the progress together in order to strengthen the NATO capacity nowadays.
Thank you, Sarajevo. Bratislava?
Well, yes, the USA is contributing the most to NATO, and the European states are contributing less, very much less. And I think that European states should also contribute a little bit much more, but I don't think that USA will call off NATO or leave European Union in this alone.
Very much. Now we have another question.
Thank you. So, do you see somewhere political aspects of NATO in current happenings, considering still the bipolar division in the world? Thank you.
Just a minute. Just a minute. You have to make sure that they understood what you want to ask them.
Maybe some more details. Yeah.
You get the question?
Not now.
Okay.
So, do you see somewhere in current situations in the world, the political actually aspect of the NATO more than the militaristic character of the alliance? Considering I still consider that the world is in that bipolar division and the bipolar alliance. So I would like to know if you see somewhere more the presence of political aspects of the alliance than that militaristic one. Thank you.
Well, to start with, there's no military without politics. Any kind of political move, or let's say military move, it is backed with a political move. So obviously, in some sort of way, NATO does have some political background to it. Is it that obvious? Well, we can't say. It's not even that good to say that NATO has political interests. It's not their main purpose to have political interests. And yeah, that's basically my opinion.
I completely agree with this statement. There is no political without military, and there is no military without political, basically. But what I already said about NATO involvement in Syria and Libya, for example, they just get involved into that without any certain military action. So basically, what they are doing right now is that they are involved politically, not actually to protect them, not actually to bring them peace and stability inside their territory. So yeah, it can be like nowadays. It is their political role is more presented than their military and their the role of protection actually.
I absolutely agree with my colleagues. I think I would say the same. So I think you got your question, your answer for the question.
Thank you. I see two more questions, but we will defer them to the other teams, which will come. So I noted. I know that you are able. I know, but I'm gonna save those questions. I want to thank you for answering your questions. Thank you, Liliana, Miriam, and Carolina. And I'd like to call to the floor the teams of Novi Sad and Banska Bystrica, Mariana and Ihor, please. So you have 2 minutes to answer the question about the importance of NATO and its relevance. You would like to start?
Yes.
Please go ahead.
Start first. Yeah, sure. Okay. Hello, everyone. Firstly, I would like to say that NATO, in its essential, promotes democratical values and tries to consult and advise its members. And if democratical methods doesn't work, NATO has the power and the strength to work in more radical and aggressive way. Lately, it seems like NATO is gathering many countries in its organization and just in order to make the power over Russia. The problem here is that not every country has the same role in NATO. And not the same impact in the NATO organization. Smaller countries join NATO for their own security and military protection. But one of the experts of for foraging politics in USA claims that NATO has the priority for only USA national politics, and considers that that is a high priority for NATO, just USA interests. But when it comes to Serbia, not all the considering the join to the NATO, not all the citizens are on the same page when it comes to reasons for bombing Serbia in 1999. In March this year was the anniversary of the 20 year anniversary of bombing our country, and that raised many other questions and reasons for bombing, and how do citizens of Serbia deal with that problem now. And I think for joining Serbia in the NATO, that is still a very discutable question, because there are still some fresh and painful memories on that bombing event. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. First of all, I would like to say that NATO was created in order to protect Europe against its main enemy, the Soviet Union. But after the Cold War, the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact fell apart, but NATO is still present. What is the main aim of NATO nowadays? Well, first of all, I have to say that still its main aim is to protect, because NATO still has a lot of enemies, China, Russia, terrorism. Moreover, people have to be ready to deal with the future enemies and problems. The second aim of NATO is to cooperate. NATO unites a lot of countries and unites a lot of countries together. The great example of this is Western Germany. Western Germany joined NATO in 1955, and they were led to create their own army. And one moment, and it's only 10 years after the Second World War. It's amazing and it's insane at the second time. In addition, I have to say that small countries, just like my colleague mentioned, they are not able to protect against huge enemies like Russia or China. Only united, they are powerful and strong. A third aim of NATO is to spread its influence, of course, and it spreads its influence with such instruments like offering grants for student activities. For example, we are going to visit NATO's headquarters as well. NATO supports a lot of non-governmental organizations, and this way they spread their influence. So 3 main aims: to protect, to cooperate, to spread. And to finish my speech, I would like to say one quotation. If you think that any institution is useless, just imagine the world without it. Try to imagine a world without NATO, and you will understand whether it is useless or not. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a statement of effect. Your visit to NATO headquarters is not sponsored by the NATO headquarters. Thank you.
I know.
There were 2 follow-up questions. One was from Belgrade, another one was from Sarajevo, and Novi Sad has a question. Okay, so you have 3 questions ahead of you. Belgrade, please come to the floor. Would you guys come here so that we don't lose time, please?
Thank you. So first of all, I'm sorry, but I really have to tell you something. I think it's really irrelevant to tell that some countries are enemies. I'm not Russophile, yeah, but I think it's really, I think it's really important to say that maybe there are countries that are more or less friendly, but it's not like 21st century, and to use those terms, it reminds us of the bad history and of the bad conflicts that happened during the 20th century. And Mike, question is for the European Union's country. Do you think that enlargement of the European Union can endanger other countries? For your personal opinion.
Can I start? Thank you. To say for the first thing that you mentioned about enemies, well, I'm from Ukraine, and for me, Russia, for example, it's a huge enemy. So, and I just expressed my opinion. first of all. And secondly, speaking about enlargement of the European Union, yeah, it's really dangerous because, for example, Russia, they don't want to see NATO's and European Union countries in front of their borders. For example, look what happened to Georgia in 2008. They wanted to join NATO and Russia bombed them. So this is really dangerous, but only for countries that are close to Russia's borders. Sorry. Yeah.
But my I think in for the countries which are not members of European Union, European Union the potential solution is for European countries to form their own military organizations so they could protect themselves and not be scared from others.
Wonderful. Sarajevo?
Thank you. A question for both of you. How would you describe the situation happening in Crimea? How would you describe the whether that situation actually caused the NATO to show its flaws and the weaknesses of the NATO, or it's not irrelevant?
Well, as a citizen of Ukraine, I have to say that what happened, that happened really suddenly. Nobody expected that, and the fact that Crimea was taken, that was occupied by Russia, it doesn't show any weakness or strength of NATO, because it really happened really suddenly, very suddenly. Even we, citizens of Ukraine, didn't expect that. And what can you say about NATO if we didn't expect that? And to add answer to your question, I would like to say that Russia got a lot of sanctions for that, and I don't think that the fact that Crimea was taken shows any weakness or strength of NATO or USA.
NATO couldn't actually intervene in that because it was much more afraid of the Russia's sanctions that are going to be imposed on them, or they didn't want to have a further conflict with the Russia, so that's why they couldn't intervene, or is it just because they didn't want to?
Well, look, coming back to Georgia, look at Georgia. NATO didn't interfere in that conflict, and there is a reasonable thing because nobody wants the third world war. If they interfered, probably we would have the third world war, and nobody needs that because it's money, it's lives of people, and it's stability in the world. So USA didn't interfere in order to keep at least status quo in that region.
I think my colleague said everything, and I don't have much to add on this topic.
Thank you. You mentioned the thing that I wanted to ask, actually, but for both of you, do you think it may be better for European Union to have its own army and its own people defending them than America to kind of impose their own military tactics and interests to European Union? So do you think that it would be better, if not totally disregarding NATO, but maybe transitioning to another kind of institution that protects European Union and the future member states?
Thank you for your question. First of all, I would like to say that it depends for whom it's going to be better, for USA or for Europe. For Europe, of course, it's going to be better if Europe had its own army, but for the USA, not, because they need dependent Europe, which is going to depend on the USA, and this way USA can affect not only their continent but also European continent. So it depends for whom it's going to be better, and in the end, I would like to say that I don't think that USA would let to lose their influence on the European continent, so they won't let them to build their own army. Thank you.
As I said earlier, as America has NATO, I think it should be a very good move for European Union and European and security for European citizens to have their own way of protecting themselves and creating some organization like NATO or something like that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any more questions here in Banska Bystrica? Does not look so. Anywhere else? If that is not the case, I'd like to thank Novi Sad and Banska Bystrica for their answers. I'd like to thank the teachers and their assistants who have been coaching the teams and preparing them for the debates today. And I, of course, would like to thank the hosts of today's debate here in Banska Bystrica for having us here. We hope that we will have a chance to continue debating with you in November 2019. And of course, in the meantime, enjoy and make useful your visit to Brussels. And good luck with your spring exams. With that, thank you very much. I think that the students here deserve a round of applause. Good. That concludes our session. Thank you very much and see you next time.